Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. We'll do about an hour of warm-up and then we'll jump into the news. Today is Wednesday, April 1st, the worst day on the internet by far, as it is completely full of April Fool's jokes slash lies, which when you're looking for accurate information, or at least informative information, I guess might be the right word to use, it's terrible. And certainly the April Fool's Day jokes start sometimes 24 hours before and sometimes go 24 hours after April Fool's Day, April 1st, just because of time zones and stupidity and scheduling things. So yeah, it's a great day to be offline. We won't be doing any April Fool's Day jokes. We'll start by scrolling down the steamdb.info 24-hour peak concurrent chart to see what people are looking at. But yeah, there is a real annoyance on this day. And video game wise, specifically, nothing really ever happens. It is not an April Fool's Day joke that I believe today is the last day you can buy the PlayStation 5, maybe the PlayStation 4 before the prices get raised. So if you want to be effectively forced into buying a PS4 or PS5, I say don't get a PS4, get a PS5. Although there is a decent argument that you really only need a PS4, that there aren't really any PS5 exclusives worth having, because yeah, there really aren't that many PS5 exclusives at all. So yeah, today would be the last day to do that. I'm still doing, personally, a lot of cleanup and decluttering, but I'm also in a weird spot where I'm gonna start to run out of projects that I can bounce around from, so at some level I might also have too much free time on my hands. It feels like in the past couple days I've had to bounce between fairly physically exhausting things and watching Supernatural, which has led me to watching too much Supernatural. A big part of it too, here we can see Mugenics is almost all the way off the charts at this point, although I wouldn't be surprised if Mugenics settles in directly above or below Binding of Isaac Rebirth and they just stay right next to each other. Resident Evil Requiem actually still is below Eugenics as far as what people are actually playing. That doesn't mean they're bad games by any means, it just means people may be done with them and had their fill of them. Whereas I think Banana is a clicker game, and so a lot of bots, a lot of people who are kind of crazy would keep on playing that game a lot longer. But yeah, I am just at the beginning of season 6 of Supernatural, so I burned through all of season 5. Season 5, I think, is in particular a mess, and you can definitely see on one hand season 5's finale, in which Lucifer gets defeated, was being written and set up for a completion of the whole story, which wouldn't have been a very good completion at all. Like the way season 5 progresses, the way it goes is pretty awful. Season 5 really, and remember these are CW seasons that are like 22 episodes or longer. It's just like way more than what a season really should be. But yeah, season 5 probably shouldn't have had any Monster of the Week stuff, any side trips, and you could have seen the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse playing a big role throughout multiple episodes, whereas they barely get one episode each. And then the threat of Lucifer in general should have played a much bigger role. Which, yeah. When I first started to rewatch Supernatural, I was thinking more on the side of abridging things and reducing the Monster of the Week stuff. But now, by the time I'm at season 5, it's really more obvious to me that the whole show needs to be remade. If such a thing could ever be actually done. I doubt it could be. But yeah, let's look at the most wish-listed charts. I see Zig's on the chat. Hi, Zig. But yeah, you could have very easily had an entire season for each of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Like, season 1 could have been war, as here's the person that is setting up the dominoes to fall in a 5-season TV show, and you defeat just war. And still, I would say you would completely get rid of Azazel, which I still don't really know at what point they just abruptly gave the Yellow-Eyes demon the name Azazel. I also don't know at what point they introduced the angel swords. Like, it seems like they kind of just come out of nowhere. And certainly when angels are first introduced, they aren't stabbing or killing demons with angel swords. They're just putting their hands on their foreheads and magically killing the demons. So yeah, I don't know if there is a certain point where demons ever get stabbed with angel swords. It's angels killing other angels with the swords. But yeah, in a remake, you would introduce Lucifer as this looming threat that was locked in hell, so he could only whisper to demons, and then the demons could, in the first season, raise war, and maybe that would be the big threat through season 2 even. But yeah, having all of that happen in season 5, like war showing up and being defeated in one episode, pestilence showing up and being defeated in one episode, he kind of shows up in 2 episodes. At the end of a previous episode is all you really see, and then hunger, famine, showing up just one episode is kind of ridiculous. And then death, the final horseman, showing up and being kind of introduced as a character who matters a lot more in the later seasons, at least as a concept, if not the same actual character. But yeah, there's no defeating of death at all. Death simply decides to side and work with Sam and Dean. There is, in season 5, still a lot of characters. They bring back characters to kind of just tragically kill them off fairly quickly. Yeah, it is surprising how little of the Roadhouse characters in the Roadhouse actually exist in Supernatural. I definitely felt like they were more of a thing than they really are. It's even a little bit surprising how little Bobby plays a role in the first 5 seasons, whereas obviously Bobby was the last minute replacement for the father character. And sometimes you'll see the mother character also show up as a last-minute replacement because clearly the father actor wasn't that good and wasn't coming back. Yeah. The demon knife versus the Colt is something that obviously if you were going to remake it, you would just introduce the idea of the demon knife first, since it's not actually as strong as the Colt is, and the Colt has a limited number of bullets, but then the Colt only is really useful in defeating Azazel and then nothing else. So it almost feels like on the Colt that there needed to be some slow year-long recharge that has to happen to use this bomb style of weapon that can kill almost everything in the universe. They actually say at the end of season 5 that there's only 5 types of beings the Colt can't kill, which I feel like the implication in the writing there was to imply that it was Lucifer can't be killed by the Colt, or angels in general just can't be killed by the Colt, and then the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse can't be killed by the Colt, and I guess they are potentially unique creatures. But that would ignore God himself. It would ignore the God sister character that's introduced many seasons in the future. It would ignore a lot of other things that show up in the jump the shark point of season 6, which I feel like, yeah, there are clearly, it still feels like 3 different supernaturals in Supernatural. There's the first 5 seasons, the next act, and then the act after that. And season 6, in the first episode, is totally trying to just reboot everything and restart everything in what I imagine is an awkward way that episodes could be played out of order. And if you're not really paying attention, the overall arcing story wouldn't really matter too much. Although they weirdly also date themselves in Supernatural, in that there is a point where Paris Hilton shows up in an episode to be a monster pagan god that they kill, which, yeah, that is kind of ridiculous. There is a point where they make jokes about whatever president was president at the time. I assume it was Obama, but it might have been might have been somebody else even before Obama. And then they make references to the swine flu pandemic that happened pre-COVID, which nobody in modern times is going to really be concerned or upset around that swine flu, which wasn't really even a pandemic. It was just an outbreak that people were very concerned about because a bunch of news people were talking about it a lot. Although, yeah, nowadays it's pretty common for different types of flus to pop up, and they do seem to be fairly contagious, but nowhere as unique and new like COVID, where they just didn't know how to treat it at all and it was actually killing people. For the most part, swine flu was not killing young, healthy, average people. So yeah, that feels somewhat dated too. You can also see that the times were slightly changing in Supernatural, and that they still are doing gay panic jokes, but they are shifting it a little bit, in that they are trying to imply that the joke was that they were actually pro-gay, people, and that they were satirizing the gay panic, which they really weren't in the first episodes, but that they are slowly shifting towards the direction that the entire United States was also shifting to. Like, it was pretty commonplace and normal in those early seasons of Supernatural to be not chastised or even looked down upon for making a gay joke or doing a gay panic joke. I mean, Bosom Buddies is basically all of that. So yeah, they certainly haven't gone woke by any means, even by season 6. And this is when they start to introduce Crowley, which Crowley is a good character, but it is a case that his introduction is just at an awkward time. Yeah. So yeah, it would certainly have made a lot more sense to introduce Crowley much earlier in the series too. Make him the king of the crossroads deals, which is who he is in the show, or at least who he starts off being, and make him the demon that also makes all the deals with crossroad demons. And yeah, in more modern times, more liberal times, you would have Crowley probably be this genderless demon that transforms their appearance all the time. So he would potentially transform from being male to female and use that appearance to trick people into making demon deals even further. Which, yeah, 2 actors playing the same character is fairly uncommon, but that is what I imagine you would want to do with Crowley. Castiel is still around. Castiel going all around the place. As far as a character goes, he's really put through the ringer, and it's really only the beginning for his character as far as who he is and what he's about. Adam shows up again for a brief second, which that was a terrible idea, is to introduce a new brother. They clearly wrote themselves into a corner because of that. What else about Supernatural? Yeah, particularly in season 5, there's just not a lot of monsters to talk about. And in season 6, they are basically introducing the idea of the monsters are coming back, but this time it's different. This time they're stronger. Which, in reality, even having gone probably 100 episodes already, Supernatural really never went back to too many monsters. You'd have ghosts, but the ghosts were all unique people that still had the same way in which they were defeated. You just find their bodies and burn their bones, salt and burn their bones. But yeah, Wendigos, the Hookman, Bloody Mary, they I don't think ever really show back up. Yeah. And then Chuck at the very end of season 5 is very much hinted to have been the god that they were looking for, the capital G Judeo-Christian God, although they don't say it completely and clearly. If that was in the minds of the main writer, it wasn't really in the minds of the other writers, because every other episode up until that point where you've seen Chuck just does not really play into that. And you are bending over backwards mentally, I think, to say that Chuck / God was just such an actor that he would put himself through all that hassle for really no reason of being mistreated, being looked down upon, being made fun of. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Plus, you also have Zachariah as an angel seeing Chuck, and plenty of other angels seeing Chuck, and apparently none of them being able to recognize that it's God. Which, yeah, that leads into probably the worst thing about the final episode of season 5, which is the over focus on the Impala, the car, like it was a much more important big character than it really was, because they set up at the beginning of that episode that the Impala had just been around forever, which it had been, but that it meant a lot more to Sam in particular than I think it really would. They introduced the idea of putting Legos down the air conditioner vent and having a army man stuck in the ashtray in the back seat, and that Sam sees that, and that helps Sam overcome Lucifer's control of his body. But yeah, there's no setup to that at all, and the way the story is told, in that you have these side stories, clearly makes it feel like the final episode of season 5 may have been hacked together, may very well have been hacked together in that they ran out of time, they ran out of budget, that they were, for one reason or another, refusing to film things. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the two actors still fighting. Season 5 ends very much in the case where it felt like season 4 ended, and it would have just been a show where Sam was the lead character and Dean was just out of the picture. Season 5 ends where Sam could be out of the picture and Dean would be the leader, which honestly, if they really had to do that, they would have been better to, in both seasons, kill off both characters and just leave it at that. Because I could see at the end of season 5 Sam and Dean both dying, having saved the world in some heroic fashion, and then you brought in just a next generation of hunters to replace them. But yeah, it also certainly would have made a lot more sense if they just were separated from each other, and if the actors weren't getting along, you could have easily had a plot where Sam is doing one thing and one B plot where Dean is doing a different thing, which only at the very end of season 5 have they ever really done that, where even in a single episode one person has gone one way versus them always going together in the exact same place. They even call it out that the two are dangerously codependent. But yeah, season 6 doesn't really start in a great way, and I feel like it is one of the weaker seasons. In fact, I would suspect the next 5 seasons of Supernatural are going to be extremely weak, and some of the things introduced as ideas in the next 5 seasons of Supernatural, which would be 6 to 10 basically, are going to be done better in the last 5 seasons. The Men of Letters concept, I think, is kind of thought about and teased in season 6, in that they say that hunting has been in the blood of the Winchesters since the Mayflower. But yeah, I will probably waste a ton of time watching all the stuff, although increasingly, as is probably the case for any long-running series, my attention span is waning quite a bit. I am just not really paying that much attention to all the episodes. And it doesn't really matter. Yeah. In a funny way, season 5 definitely has the best content as far as ideas go, that is squandered the most. Because, yeah, in retrospect, of the first 5 seasons, almost all of the ideas that are really important are in season 5. And so if all of those ideas had been introduced in season 1 or throughout the previous seasons and expanded on quite a bit, then you would have had a much better TV show by far. You'd get rid of Meg and Ruby. They do something in the end of season 5 where they show that a whole bunch of demons were also working with Azazel and watching over Sam throughout his entire life, like his prom day to teacher, things like that. Characters that just don't really matter at all. Really implying that it's not so much destiny that Sam got to where he was as much as that he was being led and tricked his whole life. Which, yeah, if that was going to be a concept, again, that should have been introduced in like season 1, and it should have been this revelation. The whole idea of the psychic children, and that there could have been other vessels that Lucifer would have used instead of Sam's body, is completely thrown out the window. So the entire demon blood psychic children concept is very, very rough throughout the first 5 seasons, because yeah, it just doesn't, it just wasn't written like Babylon 5 was, where the entire plot line and thoughts were already in the head of J. Michael Straczynski. At least he makes a very convincing argument that that's true, and he claims it to be true. Because, yeah, just clearly episodes were written on the fly. Clearly concepts were written on the fly. Clearly they didn't really know from season to season that they were going to be able to tell a longer story. And that's probably true all the way up to season 15, because every year basically is a whole new boss and a whole new bad guy to deal with. There are a lot of silly episodes in season 5 too, where it just doesn't help the seriousness of the whole season at all, because this is the big boss fight. This is defeating the devil, which they should have been very consistent on calling him Lucifer always. Sometimes they say the devil, sometimes they say Satan, and it's just like, okay, all those things mean the same thing to most people in their minds, but it's just better storytelling if everybody sticks with one name. But yeah, silly episodes where they're trapped inside of a TV by the trickster, who was revealed to actually be an archangel, Gabriel, which eventually he gets killed by Lucifer, trying to side with humanity, and before that also trying to save some of the other gods, which they throw out the other gods around the world, non-Western gods like Kali and Baldur and Odin and things like that. They throw them out all in one episode of them all getting together, and them just getting killed by Lucifer very easily. It's just kind of pointless that you would have done that at all. It would have been better to keep those concepts in the back pocket because you certainly could see that at the end of season 5 they would have ended the biblical apocalypse and defeated Lucifer, and then at that point you could see a whole bunch of Western gods coming out of the woodwork, and that might be very interesting, certainly, as if you had Odin and a whole bunch of Viking folklore show up, and they are now a threat, or Kali show up. You could easily have a season where it is some old god, some pagan god, as the next big thing to fight. So yeah, it is definitely the case, I think, that you would abridge Supernatural, but honestly it's much more like you should do a whole edit, and I don't know if there really is enough footage or fan edits to enough footage to make a fan edit that would make enough sense. Honestly, if you're going to remake the whole series, you would just write your own book series. But you could certainly take the generic concepts. You couldn't have a character named Sam and Dean or Castiel or things like that. But yeah, you could certainly write a book series like that, and that's where you would almost certainly start, and then hope that it turned into a miniseries or a TV series. But I don't know if there really is any funding there. But yeah, it definitely felt like with things like Game of Thrones that the path is being made a lot clearer, that you write book series, they get somewhat popular, they get optioned to be turned into streaming service TV shows by Netflix or somebody else. Much in the same way that the vast majority of anime shows in Japan are mangas first and gain a decent amount of popularity before they put more budget into it and animate it. Well, that is more than enough talking about Supernatural for a video game news stream, but it has been basically what I've been doing the most of, or at least of the interesting things I've been doing the most of. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about the gacha charts. We have March, and I saw a post on Reddit that said on one of the comments that they feel like they've hit peak saturation on gacha games. Pretty much the vast majority of gacha games have made less money in March than in February, and despite the fact that there are more games in March than February, the overall amount of money is staying too close to the same, and so there's just not any bigger audience. Another comment, jokingly, but I think there might very well be some truth to this, points out that the price of oil, the price of gas, the conflict in Iran may very well have also depressed the amount of money being spent on gacha games, because you gotta assume gacha games are pretty much the most expendable thing in a budget to get rid of. It's just to say, hey, I'm not going to put extra money into this digital gacha game. For me personally, still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. An interesting thing I saw there is I tried to make a deck that said Mega Shine, which is the name of the newest expansion, and it would not let me name the deck that name. I don't know what is in the word shine, because I have decks with the word mega already in the name, that the censorship algorithm is catching, because yeah, unless Shine or Hine or Hine or INE or NE, like, none of those come to mind as a bad word or anything close to a bad word. And then when I named the deck Mega Shiny, SHINY, it allowed it. So, yeah, it is incredibly crazy though for a game to not let you name a deck the name and word that you yourself are using, and it shows that they are just using some third-party bad words filter. But yeah, the newest expansion, like pretty much all the Pokemon TCG Pocket expansions, it's going on without much flash or interest. It's just not anything too special about some more cards showing up. I continue to grind on it, probably for no good reason. Then I am still playing Memento Mori. Just pay attention to the grays and the reds compared to the greens, and that'll tell you whether something is doing better or worse. Yeah, and these are estimated numbers too, but it's the only numbers we have, so we have to just take it as hopefully accurate enough. But yeah, there's unlikely, I think at this point, to be any new mobile game that would catch my attention. It is interesting, you have a Muv-Luv Garden Girls mobile game. I just saw that the Muv-Luv games were, I think, on sale as the visual novels of Muv-Luv on Steam. So is this a gacha? I would assume it is. Based off of the visual novels? I would have to assume so. Yeah. And yeah, once you get down to the lower 100s, you actually see slight improvements in green, but if you are below the top 100 gacha games, you're probably in a pretty bad state. It is questionable whether something at 143, which I have never seen this chart go that low, has some new game like this has that much chance of getting bigger. Of course, I guess some of these games might launch at the wrong time. Yeah, I think you are kind of pigeonholed into the idea that you need to launch on the first day of the month and upgrade and add new content at the end of the month. Yeah, we have 178 games. Many of these are being estimated to make only a few $1,000s, which for a gacha game just does not work at all. Some of them pretty big anime tie-in games too. They might be older ones. But yeah, you would think you need to make at least a few $100,000 each month, because you would think you would be paying for servers and paying for animators and programmers to constantly make new content. Yeah, and we are still very much in the situation where you can't really make a different type of game that's not a gacha game and end up on this chart or end up seeming relevant at all as far as mobile games go. I suppose notably Candy Crush and Monopoly Go and things like this are not on this chart, and so they may be making money or they may not. I just have no idea. It's not until you get to the 80th spot that you see an estimated $1 million showing up for these games. And then it's at the 55th spot that you're getting an estimated $2 million per month, or for this month. Then at the 40th spot, 41st spot, Memento Mori, it's when it crosses the $3 million spot. And yes, somebody who plays Momentum Mori, if they're getting $3 million a month, you're not really getting a ton of new updates every month for that. Which definitely implies to me that a lot of that money just goes to paying payroll and paying for server space. I guess we aren't really anywhere close to $1 billion a month type transactions. It was speculated that a bunch of rich Middle Eastern princes were playing these types of games, and with the conflict in Iran, maybe they're not playing the games as much. That is still speculation that we can kind of make. Love and Deep Space still holding a high ranking and making a lot of money, which perhaps also implies the audience. Like, these games don't inherently scream mainstream masculine energy in the West in particular. So yeah, I'd assume you will have more female audiences and more anime otaku audiences. Pokemon fans, I guess, would be mainstream, and Puzzles and Dragons might be mainstream. But yeah, it is pretty crazy to say that Shift Up's game, Goddess of Victory Nikkei, is in the 13th spot. Like, that is pretty crazy considering how lewd that game is, although Love and Deep Space is also lewd, so there is definitely a mature quality to a lot of these games too that seems very desirable. We don't have the updated hardware reviews. I don't think I'd really talk about them too much. I don't think that would change too much. I still haven't gotten back to playing any more Resident Evil 2, so there's really nothing to say there. And yeah, Amazon.com really suckered me, I think, in a lot of spring sale stuff, but also it really was just, I needed a lot of stuff to try and get more things done, so buying video games is out of the picture. My budget is blown. And yeah, still really not getting too far. This Class of 09 game, very positive. It's a rejection sim, it says. I remember seeing that game a long time ago. Which I would really prefer more of these discounts and events to perhaps go through my wish list or just recommend older, weirder games on the front page. Yeah, we've got some new games out. Steam Decks, Steam Machines still not available for purchase. Yeah, we are, I think, just going to be in kind of a holding pattern for a while. Yeah, I think quite a while. We're going to be in a holding pattern. This Coin game, which is a coin pusher, did attract me, so I'll put that on the wish list. Very positive, 90% positive. It's not in early access. Although, in fairness, as a video game critic, it would be kind of hard to play a game like this too much before you get into just a really grindy level, or just boring level. Is it Steam Deck verified? Doesn't say so. And that definitely feels like that would be what you want to do, is be able to play it on the Steam Deck too. But yeah, apparently not Steam Deck verified yet. Although I suspect, give it a week or two and we will have it Steam Deck verified. No refurbs available for the Steam Deck. No surprise there. People still playing basically the same thing on the Steam Deck that they have been. This is new. This scratch card game. Wonder how many people are also still playing Diablo 2 Resurrected. And it really sucks that they just couldn't find a way to add something to Diablo 1 or get it on Steam, even if they're not going to add anything or remaster it. I imagine there's people still modding and playing Diablo 2, which made it easier. Well, people are playing Rackcoin on the Steam Deck, so is the Steam Deck verified logo just not important anymore for new games, or just that slow for it to be applied? It probably is that slow for it to be applied. So yeah, how many people are online right now? 24-hour peak is 5,668 people, which is fine considering I think most people would be playing it single player. I think that really is the real way to play it. The idea of online co-op wasn't a big thing when Diablo 2 first came out. This scratch card game is 93% positive, so I'll go ahead and put that on the wish list too. This too doesn't have Steam Deck verified on it. Wonder if I'm blocking something that would label it that way or what. Let's go back to Diablo 2. Doesn't have Steam Deck verified labeled either. Alright, so we're going to go to the Video Games Chronicle articles. I don't know if there's really going to be that much, and we're going to have to take every single article today and frankly on Friday with a grain of salt, because it might be an April Fool's announcement, even if Video Games Chronicles themselves don't realize it's an April Fool's announcement. And in general, I'm suspecting there won't be that much news anyways. So April's PlayStation Plus Free Essential monthly games have been confirmed, free in quotation marks because you have to actually pay for a subscription. Order of the Fallen, Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3 remastered, and Sword Art Online something. Not sure. Fractured Daydream. Which I wouldn't say that's particularly amazing offerings by any means. It's somewhat varied, but honestly, you probably need a service. If services like this were going to be great, you need a service that offers you closer to 8 to 9 games, all very varied, all of which might catch somebody's attention. Because I can't imagine that there are too many people that would want to play Lords of the Fallen and one of the other games, or Tomb Raider and one of the other games, or Sword Art Online and one of the other games. So at best, for an entire month, you may have one game you actually want to play, but it won't even really likely be a game that you absolutely wanted to play. Yeah, even 3 Tomb Raider games. They're still going to be pretty old games. I don't know if anybody really would want to play them for the entirety of a month. Let's see. After asking the Japanese public to help it find its first ever claw machine, Taito instead found its second. The search for the Crown 602, believed to be Japan's first domestic crane game, continues. It is very possible that there were very few of them in the first claw machines, and they were all destroyed. You can see in this picture, if this is the second crane game designed to ever be made, that it is a lot of wood with metal trim and a lot of glass. And so it would be very, very easy for there to have only been 100 units, and all 100 units would have been broken and tossed or replaced with something else and tossed. I could see that totally being the case. Yep. What they did with a lot of the Donkey Kong machines, I believe, was, as far as the arcade machines, is that they would retrofit them into being Popeye arcade machines after a while, and that was pretty standard, is that you could do a board swap as an arcade owner, and so you were paying still a real premium of like close to the equivalent of $200 to put in what would be a computer, a different computer, into an arcade machine, and then you would just scrape off the stickers and banners and the art and swap it out the arcade machine to play a different type of game once you were no longer getting people to put quarters into the old games. Because yeah, arcade games had this real big problem in that the games got fairly boring, and that they did have to trade arcade machines or replace them with newer arcade machines to just get people to play them. People complain about backlogs and ADHD gamers nowadays, but it was true in arcade machines too. A Pac-Man certainly could have been popular for 4 or 5 years, but it was going to start eventually getting boring. People were going to stop playing it, and then you would have to do something different with the arcade machine, either trade it or upgrade it. And yeah, eventually you even had systems where they were designed to have just cartridges and different games that could be swapped out. Crane games have more mechanical elements, which would make it a lot more difficult to retrofit something into it. Apparently this crane game lied on its side like that, which is an intriguing idea. Certainly that's more like a pinball table than the stand-up unit crane games. It also certainly speaks to the fact that companies like Taito and companies in general just don't have a warehouse somewhere where they're intentionally keeping museums and of their own old creations. Even the Nintendo Museum feels pretty light as far as what they actually have to show off. And perhaps that is something that could be improved with copyright and trademarks and patents in general, is that if you had a requirement that you had to maintain for evidence the final product that you shipped, then there would be a lot more historical collections of these things. There's a decent chance that there are collectors out there that have these crane machines. They just aren't willing to admit they have them, or aren't going to give them the Taito, or haven't heard that Taito is looking for it. This is the first I've heard of Taito looking for their original Crane Machine games. I imagine they asked their Japanese audience on Twitter, and that was about it. Yep. Even the amount they're offering here, $630, it's not really that much. Yeah. And they're not willing to pay any more tips. So yeah, Taito's being very cheap as far as the rewards they had offered. Yeah, arcade machines nowadays are very vertical, obviously, and still take up a ton of space. I did see someone take an IKEA bookshelf and try to build an arcade machine with it, and it's a somewhat intriguing idea because an IKEA bookshelf is only going to be like a fraction of the depth that an actual arcade machine would be, and the hardware, as far as a computer running an emulator, is insignificantly small compared to the electronics in an actual arcade machine. But the problem with the build, where it would need a lot more thought, is that to mount a TV, a flat screen LCD on there, required them to replace the backing on the bookshelf with wood, which would have significantly increased the material cost. They had to use different woods instead of just using one of the shelves to put the buttons and make the switch. There's a lot of labor intensive stuff you have to do to print out the templates and drill out where you're going to put the control sticks and buttons on an arcade machine. And yeah, you're still going to need a mini PC of some sort, and probably some speakers, some kind of marquee light, unless you're going to put another monitor up there. It could be done, but it's just not going to be anywhere as cheap as people might like it to do. And that has been the problem with the arcade 1-ups and the at-home games or at-games mini to scale arcade machines too, is that these mini arcade machines are still just too expensive as far as the wood that is necessary to build things up that way. And I half wonder if you shouldn't try to build something that is more of a aluminum extrusion pipe skeleton instead of trying to use wood or particle board. Even IKEA is perhaps too expensive. Maybe cardboard. At a certain level, a thick enough cardboard might be good enough. Of course, the second you spilled any water anywhere, the cardboard would turn soggy, but yeah. Triple wall cardboard pieces would be super light. It could be directly printed on and would be certainly good enough for the side pieces as far as the side holding the frame and looking like an arcade machine. But yeah, you still probably would have to infuse it with some aluminum for a much smaller frame. But honestly, I don't think you can get the price down low enough for it to make sense ever. Particularly when the alternative that people don't really consider is get a Steam Deck if you can get one, run the emulation on that, put it in a standard dock, USB-C to HDMI cord is at most all you really need, and plug it into a TV. Take all the savings that you would have spent building an arcade machine and buy a relatively cheap, low quality wireless fight stick. Yeah, and yeah, once you have a fight stick that's wireless, you have much more of a modern setup. Yeah. The only time I feel like the virtualization of an arcade machine still kind of makes sense is if you were going to do virtual pinball, just because you really cannot build your own pinball machine without spending thousands of dollars, and it's just going to be that one unique pinball machine, and you can't really buy a pinball machine without spending thousands of dollars. So yeah, you still would cost, to get a good virtual pinball machine, it still would cost thousands of dollars, but it would be one set of $4,000 or $5,000, where to get even 3 pinball machines in your house that are real pinball machines would be probably $15,000. Yeah, and building your own pinball machine is going to get you probably $3,000 at minimum, and it will just be some custom thing. Let's see. April's news. Upcoming games: Pragmata, Pokemon, Saros, and more. I think we're going to be seeing Steam links of all of these games. What is this one? This is Pragmata. This, I guess, is Saros, yeah. This is PI for Hire. So I guess this is Pokemon over here in the corner. And yeah, there's potentially a lot of games that are going to come out in April. We are now in the point where games are actually going to come out. Things are going to come out of early access, like Hades 2. So it will probably be that the streams go longer. I still have heavy suspicions that Pragmata is going to flop pretty heavily. Which, by the way, apparently the Mario Galaxy movie in early preview reviews has flopped pretty heavily, ranking about a 44 out of 100 in one of the Metacritic / Rotten Tomatoes type thing. Which, considering I didn't like the first Mario movie, maybe that means I would like the first one, the second one, because I didn't. People really sung the praises of the first one way more than I thought they did. Kind of doesn't matter. Like, it's very possible that mainstream video critics who were given early access to the Mario Galaxy movie are not the right audience, or just are snobs in general. So I wouldn't suggest anybody be deterred to watch it if they want to watch it. And as a video game critic, it's still kind of a nice thing if I could manage to go out and see it in theaters. The Mario Galaxy movie is probably the only movie in the next year or two that I would want to see in theaters. So it's still a pretty unique situation. Let's see, a Pokemon Home update is coming this week, finally adding Legend Z-A support. Interesting. So you could very easily be all the way through Legend Z-A, and now I guess you could transfer those. Pokemon caught in Legend Z-A can be moved to Pokemon Home, and then to Pokemon Champions, which will be released next week. But Pokemon from Legend Z-A can't be moved to other titles in the series. I wonder why that's the case, because yes, we know that there's like new mega creatures in Legend Z-A. I would think that there would be regular Pokemon that should be compatible with other older Pokemon games. And then it's questionable whether the new game Winds and Waves are going to be compatible. Certainly doesn't make Pokemon Home sound like the ultimate solution as far as transferring Pokemon goes. But yeah, what can you say? Pokemon's a mess, and it's crazy how successful it has been as a mess. Here's some good news, I think, for the gaming community overall. The US Patent Office has revoked Nintendo's patent on summoning characters to make them battle. The USPTO director made a rare order to re-examine the patent last year. Noticeably, the Patent Office in the US, Patent and Trade Office, have generally a process in which they approve and rubber stamp something unless it's been challenged. So, with this specific rejection of all 26 claims by Nintendo, this takes us a step closer to more people being able to make games similar to Pokemon, which, yeah, for as bad as Pokemon games are, they should suffer some more competition, and some other game developers should be able to make games like that without fear of being sued. Of course, Nintendo now has 2 months to respond, or longer if it asks for an extension, so they could probably drag this out. Yeah. I question in the bigger aspect, though, whether code, video game code, or computer code in general should be patentable at all. It does not seem like it has created any real level of success for middle-sized or small-sized business people. It really feels like patents and copyrights have just become yet another extra protection for super rich people, much in the same way that the police in the United States are much more likely to protect rich people and their property than they are to care about a poor person getting their wallet stolen. Yeah, and that unfortunately has been the case in the United States always. It's probably the case in most countries that police forces tend to protect the property and the finances of richer people more than poor people. Inherently, there is also a problem with something being a fine versus something being jail time or some other equally offensive penalty. If you can just pay off speeding tickets every single day and still speed, then rich people are allowed to speed, whereas poor people can't actually afford that, and so they aren't allowed to speed. Where if everybody who was caught speeding got points on their license and their license revoked, or had to go through a defensive driving class every single time, then rich people would not be able to speed anywhere as much. And frankly, if it got to the point where people who were speeding got thrown in jail for a day, or the local lockup, then that kind of timeout would certainly affect everyone a little bit more equally. On bigger things than speeding, where you actually have to go to actual trials, if all of the lawyers were assigned to you and you could not hire newer lawyers, then it would be an equally fair system. It probably still wouldn't be particularly great or fair, but it would be a more equal, fair system for everybody involved. Where right now, if Nintendo sues somebody, they can bring teams of hundreds of lawyers and put millions of dollars into it, which people cannot afford to defend against, despite Palworld trying their best. Palworld's still in early access, and people are still playing it, but I don't know if it ever is going to come out of early access. I don't know if the final product that it comes out as is going to actually be something worth playing. The history most likely is going to remember Palworld as the thing that broke Pokemon and led to some other company, possibly Epic, would be a good guess. Like, it would make a lot of sense for Epic to make a Pokemon type game and try something like that. But yeah, it could be anybody, really. Could make a creature collector game. Although it is interesting also that you have things like Monster Hunter and Digimon that feel like they could be creature collector games, and they just aren't. Dispatch is still very popular. Disney Dreamlight Valley is popular enough, but I think it really should be a lot more popular. Claire Expedition 33 is pretty popular. Let's see, Mind's Eye is adding a new mission, which will share some of the evidence of the alleged studio sabotage, the CEO says. The CEO, Mark Gerald, previously said organized espionage contributed to the game's poor launch. This is insane to say out loud, let alone actually act on. And frankly, it really just continues to paint the CEO into this paranoid, delusional breakdown light, because that's what it really sounds like is happening to him. Even if there was organized espionage, which very possibly there might be, to say you're going to put the evidence in the game instead of putting the evidence in a court system, in a legal filing, is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And perhaps it isn't so much a level of craziness as it is just a level of trolling. This Dead by Daylight game, I guess, still has a lot of people playing it too. It is amazing how successful it has been and how much it's been able to add more and more content as an online player versus player exclusive game and as a horror game. I really would not have expected it to still be going 10 years later, which that is really shocking too, is that this has just been going for 10 years and it's still getting updates, taking just a very simple premise, I guess, and polishing it. And it's a kind of great example where you get your core audience, and if you lock in a core audience and it's big enough, things just work. I don't know if this game even has like in-app purchases. It has a base price and a whole bunch of DLC, which would equal $337.66. So it might very well be the case that to play some of the levels you have to continuously put more money into it, which might be the absolute best way that DLC works, and how we kind of would prefer everything to work is that if you play the base game and you like it but don't want to engage any further, you don't have to put any more money in it. If you want to specifically want to add a Saw themed level, I would assume is what this is, then you pay that premium that the Saw license would require. Of course, the problem with this being online PvP would make me suspect that you have to, everybody playing that chapter, this Saw chapter for instance, would have to pay for the DLC and own it. So there will undoubtedly be some DLCs that are just not as popular as others. These are all just games coming out pretty soon, I think, or are already out. Alright, before I go any further, looks like we still got a decent amount of Video Games Chronicle news. I'm going to take my first break, so I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So, our next Video Games Chronicle article says Marathon's latest patch fixes the move exploit that Bungie says is unhealthy. I'm sure some people are going to be upset about that. I am still extremely shocked based on just the visuals here of this clunky robot outfit that people are interested in playing Marathon. But you know, it may very well be the case that visuals just don't matter that much in a Bungie made player versus player shooter type game like Halo or Destiny. Let's see. Well, this is shocking. The Stellar Blade developer ShiftUp has acquired the Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami's new studio. ShiftUp will publish and support all of Unbound's future games. I don't think Unbound has made anything at this point. This is shocking in a few ways. First of all, because it is a Korean developer, ShiftUp, with Korean politics and economics being extremely different than Japanese politics and economics, and Koreans and Japanese in general being kind of angry at each other for probably good reasons. Japan is not very popular for the things it's done in the past, and for the fact that it really hasn't apologized for the things it's done in the past, or even really given a lot of indication that it would do anything different in the future. It makes a little bit more sense if you think about Shinji Mikami himself being the person who is constantly referred to and probably self-promotes himself as the creator of Resident Evil. And while that is, as far as I know, true, he's basically the creator of Resident Evil 1. Like, he really, I don't think, has as much influence or as many ideas of what you get into when you see Resident Evil 4. Which, let's face it, Resident Evil 4 was really what made the Resident Evil series succeed and continue to go even past pretty bad games like Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. But yeah, Shinji Mikami's previous new studio made the game The Evil Within, and he made The Evil Within, and I mean, it felt very much like Resident Evil 1 and way worse than Resident Evil 1 in that it wasn't really even trying to tell much of a story, and it was just trying to have a whole bunch of different random locations. The idea that it's all in a simulation, while intriguing, was really just an excuse for them to create a bunch of different locations that didn't connect in any way. And he was in The Evil Within still leaning heavily on the idea of Crimson Reds, where you have to effectively burn the corpses to permanently defeat them. The paths in The Evil Within are extremely linear, just going from the start point to the end point. It is now nowhere as good as Resident Evil 4. And see, I really don't know how much of his influence, Shinji Mikami's influence, really even existed in, like, Resident Evil 2. As I'm playing the remake of Resident Evil 2 right now, you are effectively still in an area and you're getting keys to unlock new areas, but you're also being chased by a monster the whole time, and the zombies in the remake are certainly much more of a challenge. So yeah, it does kind of feel like Shinji Mikami is on the outs. He has failed in a couple of positions to be a leader that continues to make good games, or it feels like. And so this may be Shift Up is his last option to go with, and Shift Up has the extra money certainly to spend on it. But it is a odd bedfellows, certainly strange bedfellows, in that Shift Up themselves have never really been about horror. And so then it would be very funny if Shinji Mikami all of a sudden had the Shift Up style of a lot of lewd character designs, which I doubt is going to be the case. Although, in fairness, Resident Evil always did have a little bit of lewdness to it that has been polished away in the remakes. So yeah, I imagine this is very much going to be a hands-off investment, and in a few years from now we will hear that Shinji Mikami's new company either parts way with Shinji Mikami once again, and that he just serially makes new companies and then leaves them, such as Tango Gameworks, which made Ghostwire and Hi-Fi Rush, which are two very different games, after making Evil Within 1 and 2. But yeah, Mikami was working at Capcom when he made the first Resident Evil, the 2002 GameCube remake of Resident Evil 1, and Resident Evil 4, among other titles. So he did make 4, which is weird. But clearly he's not really trying to make action horror games. It's not in his mind. But yeah, this will be interesting. On the other hand, even though Shinji Mikami perhaps is not the best company to acquire, it's probably the only one that Shift Up could have acquired from as far as Japanese companies, just because of Japanese-Korean relations. It also tells a story of Shift Up getting really big really fast, and we don't want to see Shift Up become the next Embracer that just acquires a whole bunch of different companies. We also don't want to see Shinji Mikami's Japanese company just making animations for Shift Up's games and being a second-party developer for support staff, which it might very well become the case. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a lack of game developers and animators that are available for hire in Korea. And so this might be the beginning of a trend in that Korean successful companies are going to have to start hiring animators from other countries, although going to Japan still seems like it would be kind of expensive. Yeah. It is a shocking announcement, to say the least. I will be very interested to see what happens around here, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Shinji Mikami just retires before the first game, even from Unbound, gets released. This might also speak to a desire amongst Shift Ups to legitimize itself a little bit further, and not have all of their games just be a lewd, cartoony anime style to it, which obviously that desire does exist with Shift Up, because Stellar Blade was clearly very interested in the concept of being more like a Nier Automata game with more realistic graphics. Now, I'm assuming all this footage has been doctored to have creepy stuff in the background, but I also feel like the offices themselves may have just been practically decorated this way as a way of wasting money. Um, for instance, the mouse that looks like an insect, it feels like that would be harder to 3D CGI than it would be to just have something like that practically made. That being said, this might very well be all that Studio Unbound and its 50 employees have been doing, is just animating this announcement video. So there's just like way too many dark, creepy things around for no good reason if those were actual decorations. Noticeably, too, what can we see as far as the team of Unbound that's being shown here? I assume these are all Unbound employees. Is that it seems like it is a whole bunch of old Japanese guys. Yeah. Doesn't feel like there's a lot of fresh blood there. And if they look old as Japanese people, they probably are very old, because it tends to be the case that even Japanese people in their 50s look to be about 35. Yeah, you're definitely not seeing a more than like one female. There's one female there in that picture, but she may be from Shift Up. And when they showed the footage of Nikkei Goddess Victory there for a second, that is just a great example of the completely different art style that Shift Up has done in the past, and the two of their games have looked that way, where Stellar Blade is somewhat realistic but still pretty colorful and cartoony and anime-esque, which I don't think Shinji Mikami has ever worked in that art style at all. Like, he's probably old enough that the cartoons he would have seen when he was a kid, if he saw any cartoons, would be black and white Mickey Mouse type things. Yeah, it's way too many CGI things there. Feels like that speaks to an intent to distract, a lack of focus on having anything interesting to say. Be nice, I guess, if the closed captions were on, come to think of it. And then there is this one white guy, which I wonder what he's all about. What he does at Unbound, he probably does the translations. There you can have a biblically accurate angel being shown. Just like a ton of CGI there. Yeah, and going forward, I will try and have the subtitles on, so that's more helpful. Can't really play the audio. I could, but I'm just not gonna risk content IDs from that. But yeah, this announcement has nothing to announce other than to say that Unbound seems to have, or it seems to be at least showing off the thought that they can animate a bunch of stuff. And so it is very believable that Unbound at some point will just be the animator for some Stellar Blade like game that gets made by Shift Up. But yeah, this may very well also be an example where Shift Up can't scale up inside of Korea themselves. They can't just find another 30 to 100 employees to hire. And maybe they could. Maybe it's just easier to let somebody else do it and acquire that company. Very interesting announcement, though. I would have never really expected when I first started playing Destiny Child, the first game made by Shift Up, that it was ever going to be a company that had any level of success. I thought it was going to be a gacha company that just was going to make enough money to keep going but never do anything beyond that, which makes me suspect heavily that a company like Bank of Innovation, I think is the name of it, Bank of Imagination maybe, the makers of Memento Mori, I mean, there is a possibility certainly that that company might become a big thing, or the developers of Love and Deep Space might become a big thing. It may very well be the case that we start to see more gacha game companies get enough success that they start to become bigger companies and have more ambition. Of course, where that company is, I think will heavily affect how big a company can grow. Shift Up, being in Korea, I think gained extra success by being in Korea, whereas if Shift Up was just a Japanese company making Destiny Child, they probably would have never been given the opportunity to grow. It might also speak to different attitudes between Koreans and Japanese, and that Shift Up was willing to break out of the standard that was expected of them and do something bigger, whereas a Japanese gacha company would just sell themselves as a gacha company and have no opportunity or even desire to be anything more than a gacha company. Moving on, Neverwinter, Star Trek Online, and Champions Online veterans have rejoined the Cryptic Studios, which implies to me that they worked at Cryptic Studios and now they're being rehired. So the MMO studio says it's unifying legacy expertise with a fresh perspective. So yeah, the fact that that can even happen almost makes it seem like Cryptic Studios was going through some kind of bankruptcy and had to lay off a bunch of people, but did it in a very nice way that they'd actually come back. Or perhaps the CEO, Jack Emmert, is just really beloved. Is bringing back people that got laid off. And I guess that is a great way, certainly, in which this could happen. It very rarely happens. But yeah, previous CEO leaves, returns to the studio now, bringing back people that he's worked with in the past. Is that a guaranteed success? No. It's very possible that the old people you're bringing back, basically because of your experience with them / nepotism, whatever you want to call it, are not the best game developers nowadays. I would say if I was the CEO of a company and I left the company and then a bunch of people got laid off and I liked those people and then I became CEO of that company again, I wouldn't immediately hire them back because I'd be wanting to move forward. I would want people to be able to use the newest technologies, the newest game engines, the newest concepts. I wouldn't want to bring back people who potentially don't know that, or frankly, who are older and won't stay around for an entire project, or older and would demand to be paid more fairly. All of those are factors, certainly. And generally speaking, if you get laid off at a company, you shouldn't go back to them, and they shouldn't ask you to come back. That relationship is going to be somewhat soured, and it should just be over, even if you are just laid off for no causes. Obviously, if you're fired from a company, you shouldn't come back. You're really running your company terribly if you fire people and then bring them back later. But yeah, I'm not familiar with Cryptic Studios. I have no idea what they're making. It feels like it's going to be some kind of online game of some sort. And as a gamer, I don't want to see old talent disappear, but I probably would want to see them be promoted to more advisory roles and less direct computer programming roles. And for a lot of programmers, maybe they don't have any ideas, so being a leader, being an advisor, maybe doesn't really work either. There almost is this case, and it's probably true for every job, that as people get older, they should be paid more to do less. Of course, capitalism would never agree with that, but yeah, it would make a lot of sense to say, hey, as you've put 30 years into a company, all of a sudden you're going to be paid the same amount and have the same health insurance and benefits, but we're going to have you phone in once a week or work for 20 hours instead of 40 hours, or in the gaming industry, work for 40 hours instead of 80 hours a week. Oh yeah, I talked about in the last stream the idea of a base amount standard, where TVs would rotate 90 degrees, or frankly, there's no reason not to have the standard where it would rotate 360 degrees based on a signal from the HDMI or whatever connection. So you can have a computer basically say, we're going to go vertical and show vertical format, or we're going to go horizontal and show horizontal format. I looked into it a little bit. At one time, Samsung did make a wall mount that did that, basically to work with Samsung phones and mirror casting. So I assume it was receiving extra signals from their smartphones to rotate based on whether you were connected via mirror casting to the TV. But they don't make it anymore as far as it seems, and it definitely wasn't a standard. So yes, there is a possibility. And it would be a kind of cool idea if all TVs just had mounts that could rotate 360 degrees. I don't think you'd get too fancy with it where you would see a boat on the screen and then the TV would rock back and forth. And honestly, 360 degrees is probably just something in the computer code that you could put in there, but the reality is it probably would only need to be in 45-degree increments. You would have to mount the TVs high enough and low enough so they don't hit the ceiling or floor when they rotate, and far enough away from the edges when they go horizontal that they wouldn't hit the walls. But most people would put a TV somewhere in the center of a wall, so that really wouldn't be an issue. I definitely think you could send an IC squared signal through the bolts in the VESA mounts, so you wouldn't even have to plug in a specific cord, although it might just be easier, and for safety reasons better, to have a small 2-wire cord to send the signals. I guess there is perhaps manufacturing concerns and dangers there too, but nowadays monitors tend to be so incredibly light, it would be nothing to have them be able to rotate. Yep, and that would be, I think, to me, as interesting as moving up to 8K resolutions. Like, it would be a gimmick, certainly, but TV's always selling gimmicks. But yeah, that technology only existed for a brief time. Maybe Samsung has patents on it, and that's the problem. Most people probably wouldn't ever buy mounts that would use them to rotate automatically via a motor, but who knows? Yep. at some point, technology will also get to the point where I think you will just paint on a monitor onto a wall. It'll just have some kind of nanotubes that you just paint onto the wall, and it will be edge to edge at that point, and the blackness will be so inky black that the TV could show you a vertical image and it would look perfect, or it could show you a horizontal image and it would look perfect. Moving on, we have still about half a dozen Video Games Chronicle articles. Blaze announces an Evercade Nexus handheld, including enhanced versions of Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. It is interesting, certainly, to have any new handhelds announced amongst everything being more expensive. The screens on these are fairly small by modern standards. 5.89 is probably too small. I'd say 7-inch diagonal minimum is really what you want, and that makes a very large screen that then has that switch feel where you have to kind of have a giant device to justify the screen size. In this design, seeing these buttons down here does really imply that the screen could be bigger if they wanted to. Yeah. It wouldn't really be changing anything if you had a button here, button here, button here, button here, got rid of all of this, and then stretched the whole thing a little lower. I imagine this is not going to be a particularly impressive device, and it will be, I suspect, way more expensive than anybody reasonably should spend. It perhaps speaks to a fandom of some of the Game Gear, some of the PlayStation Vita fans out there, although the games that they're offering you here don't really feel like games that were on any specific handheld or on specific like console in general. Having a button dedicated to rotating the screen 90 degrees seems crazy. And they're pre-ordering April 1st, so maybe it's an April Fool's Day joke. That is one thing I will say about the Steam Deck, that it is capable, at least in desktop mode. They want $230 for something that probably is only worth maybe $150. I'd honestly like to see it closer to $80. At least in desktop mode, you can rotate the screen on SteamOS, but there is not really any settings or buttons combination to do it. It is running a command. You can certainly add that command to then run certain games, but it really would be a per game basis thing. And yeah, generally I think a lot of games would just by default have their own code to rotate the screen. The difference between a game changing it and rotating the screen is that the game would have better control of how things look and probably better frames, whereas changing the resolution is potentially going to cause things to break. Let's see, Fanta and Xbox are teaming up for a special campaign including a Fanta Crimson flavor. Fanta cans will feature Xbox game characters for a limited time. Fanta is a UK brand of drinks, I believe. I don't think you can find it particularly easily in the United States. I think Fanta is labeled and branded as something else and probably taste a little different in the United States. I'm trying to remember if Fanta was the one that Germany created, because Coca-Cola was not allowed to be shipped over to World War II Germany. It might have been that brand. I think it was all acquired by either Pepsi or Coca-Cola at some point. It is an interesting hint that we may be back to some weirder advertisements as far as Xbox goes. Also perhaps highlights the games they're still interested in promoting, such as Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Forza, Halo, and Diablo. But yeah, it definitely feels like they are, with this ad campaign, going to focus on big tentpole games and reestablishing the tentpole games. Not really a huge amount of helpful news, though, as far as a news story. That I think anybody who's out there collecting Xbox memorabilia would probably have to be either a massive collector who's been doing it for a long time or a fool, because I don't think there's a lot of demand that's going to exist for Xbox memorabilia in 10 years, which might very well make it fairly rare. So one person should be out there collecting these types of things. Of course, collecting soda cans for the long haul is kind of hard. You basically need to drain the cans and thoroughly clean them. You can't keep the cans sealed, otherwise they will eventually just rust the cans completely. Which makes them harder to collect. Moving on, Eidos Montreal announces mass layoffs for the third year in a row as the studio head has left. I guess mass layoffs means 124 employees, which I don't know what. I suppose there isn't really a technical number as far as what makes something mass layoffs or not. It is really just whether they want to imply it's a lot of layoffs or not. I would say if your average game development team is 30 people, you're implying here that over 4 teams have been laid off, so I would say that seems massive. This was yet another amount of layoffs that we've just constantly been hearing layoffs all over the place. The game industry at some point may just reveal itself to be a paper tiger. Is that a saying? I think it is. In that there may be so many people that have been laid off that there's really nobody left to actually make games. Eidos Montreal apparently have been working as a support studio on the Fable reboot. Maybe this implies the Fable reboot is done. Maybe this implies more likely the Fable reboot is cancelled. Which it would be kind of a shame if the Fable reboot is cancelled, but it wouldn't affect me anywhere as much as it would affect other fans or actual fans of Fable. Yeah. Apparently they were also co-developing Grounded 2 with Obsidian Entertainment. So yeah, these kinds of layoffs definitely imply that Eidos Montreal was not getting a renewed contract with Microsoft for one reason or another. It's the only thing that makes sense. Yeah, and it's questionable whether at this point they would ever make another Deus Ex game, although it's questionable whether they need to make another Deus Ex game. perhaps it is an example where when a good game comes out of a company, maybe that is the time where employees should move on and form their own companies. It doesn't happen very often, or move on to other companies. But yeah, it seems like once you have a big hit, the worst thing you can do in the long run is stay with that company and show loyalty. And the best thing, and that's probably true for any job, really, is that once you have a success that you can put on your resume, something you can point to as a big success, move on. And particularly in the game industry, you have to stay with a company. Usually you have to stay with a company to get your names in the credits, so you have to be there until it's launched. But after that, yeah, if the layoffs don't get you first, quit, retire, move on, make your own company. I can't help but think that it is just becoming standard that a lot of these game developers know they're going to be laid off, and then they are making plans for it. And sure, maybe unionization will help some of that, but there is still problems, even if you were unionized, in that if this is a case that Microsoft cut contracts with Eidos Montreal, which it feels like that is exactly what happened here, Eidos Montreal would just not have any money and would still be able to and have to make layoffs. It also is probably a great example of how most people who are CEOs, most people who are in charge of companies, are not these geniuses that they pretend to be. They can keep businesses afloat in the bad times, and generally are just succeeding based off of luck in the good times. Here's an interesting title. Box Room is a home designer game that turns your actual Steam library into physical game boxes. Players can build shelving units and use them to arrange their existing Steam games. I don't think of this immediately from the idea of Steam games or video games, but I definitely kind of like the idea if you could do it with movies and DVDs. Now this is different than the idea I was having as far as a collection of mini games to pick a game you haven't played from your backlog, so I won't really make a ton of comparisons there, although the highly polished nature of something like this, if it is visually polished, could certainly help in that aspect. This almost feels like this is something, as somebody who has a ton of video games, I should get no matter what. Just immediately buy it. That being said, it also potentially is going to be a asset flippy room designer type experience that never gets out of early access. There is certainly a level here of the age in which the room is targeted to. This is a room of like a preteen or a teenager. It's not really the adult room that a lot of gamers probably have, where you would actually have a girl/girlfriend also sharing that room. Also, with these home designer things, you're potentially over decorating to an extreme amount, and the actual games on the shelf look pretty crappy, I have to say. I imagine a lot of this art is being pulled directly from the Steam pages, and manuals and things like that are being pulled from the Steam pages, and that you aren't really, they aren't paying some kind of license or anything for it. So yeah, the one thing it's really selling itself on is the worst looking thing here. I'm gonna add this to my library as a demo. But yeah, in a lot of ways I think this is putting a lot of your time and effort into this stuff, into decorating a fictional room. And it's kind of dystopian in the idea that you couldn't potentially do this yourself in the real world. You could certainly print out covers to go on CD cases for Steam games. In realistic terms, you probably would just want something somewhat flat with an NFC tag on it if you were going to do that, but even that's probably a little unnecessary. But yeah, you could certainly write to an NFC tag a Steam link that would a link to the Steam client application to launch a game automatically. I'm pretty sure you could do that. At the very least, you can launch a game's page. You may not be able to directly launch a game, depending on if it's Windows or Linux. If it's Linux, I definitely think you could take an NFC tag and have a game launch by that being scanned. And then you could have certainly a lot of that, but at a certain point they would stop being like DVD cases on a shelf, and they would be closer to playing cards, which I have 5,000 games. That would make a lot more sense to have playing cards than it would to have DVD things on the shelf. And that's really the thing that I find most disappointing about this is spine art is not something that Steam games are going to make as far as the spine of the DVD shelf. And so you can see it is just very boring black and white text. It's surprising it's not blue and in theme of Steam. So yeah, when on a shelf like that, the spine art is the first thing that's going to grab your eye, and you want it to look very pretty. I'm looking over at my anime shelves, and the spine art for every single show has the name of the show in a very unique, stylized fashion. It has a whole bunch of artists in it, and each DVD competes with your eyes to convince you to see something bigger. And if you have a box set, for instance, then you're going to have one big art on the spine versus several thin arts. And then in many cases, you may have like 5 discs that are being shown, and the spine on the discs might connect to show a whole image, although that often isn't done because it doesn't line up particularly well. So yeah, I think the playing card idea makes a lot more sense, but even that would be tough. It'd be tough to print that at home. It would be tough to do something that looked really good or looked good on a shelf. Of course, the Steam client and the way it digitally presents games is not particularly great either. What you really need is a slideshow of images on a cheap monitor, which I've seen some of those cheap 1080p monitors for like $50. If you could get that to just do a slideshow of different games to encourage people or remind you of what games you want to possibly play, that would work a lot better. And yeah, I'll say it. While I do have some weird, possibly described as childish decorations in my room, it is not anywhere as busy as this is. It's not crazy. I definitely don't have video game sheets or kid sheets. I don't have ugly plaid chairs. I don't have plaid chairs and beanbag chairs that are not matching the style of the wood. I don't have bookshelves that are completely clashing with the style of the wood of the bed frames. Yeah, I try to match things as much as possible. Yeah. So I think the concept maybe makes sense, but the practicality of actually implementing this, if it actually gets worked on quite a bit, it's going to be hard. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is just another room designing game that has a gimmick and then gets abandoned in early access. I'll put this on the follow list too. Moving on, Disney may be interested in acquiring Epic Games at some point. It's been claimed Disney previously invested $1.5 billion in Fortnite and the Unreal Engine company. At a certain level, I guess that kind of makes sense. Although it would be weird because it would be Disney doing a 180 and getting back into the video game world when they have abandoned the video game world at least once, if not 2 or 3 times now. But yeah, Disney might be under new management at some point in the future, or they may just have different attitudes in the future, so I could see them acquiring them for them being the place and the way they make video games in the future. I could also see them just acquiring the talent and the engine of the Unreal Engine to use it to make movies and theme park attraction animations and CGI. Of course, this is basically pure speculation as far as an article goes, and you could have said the exact same thing, that Disney may be interested in acquiring Epic Games 5 years ago, and it still would have been a true statement. They might be, they might not. Are we still really in the deep world of acquisition wars, particularly for Disney, that they feel like they need to acquire something else, or that they can get away with acquiring something else? They probably can get away with it. If the economy wasn't so bad, I imagine a lot of companies would be acquiring a bunch of other companies. But yeah, it's all just speculation at this point, not really informative or helpful. If Disney does acquire Epic Games at some point in the future, the number of Disney games is only going to change a little bit. The number of Epic Games is only going to change a little bit. You might see more people moving away from the Unreal Engine, which I would like to push people to the Godot engine, but I question how easy it would be to move from the Unreal Engine to the Godot engine, particularly if you're making a first-person shooter, military-type shooter game. Let's see, the father of PlayStation, Ken Kutaragi, is going to make a rare public appearance at the UK's Game Republic event. A former Sony chairman will speak about his career and meet fans. I imagine he will be fairly old at this point. And then Mario Kart World Update adds Bomb on Blast Battle Mode plus around 50 balancing tweaks and bug fixes. It is interesting that it has not been more consistent on the number of updates. We're at version 1.6.0 now. Yeah. Had there been more consistent, impactful updates happening to Mario Kart World, people might be more hyped on that Mario Kart game instead of people being fairly disappointed by it, and I think long since have stopped playing it. Which there is, I suppose, a danger, particularly for Nintendo, that they will just re-release Mario Kart World with updates later on their next console and pretend like it's a brand new game. Because it does feel like the Switch 2 is not going to be a massive success or have a whole bunch of exclusive games on it. Of course, if the Switch 2 is a failure, like the Wii U was a failure, then it does also feel like they need to change something physical about their next console. I don't think they can just make a Switch 3 or something that looks like a Switch 3. I don't know what they can physically change on their consoles that would get people excited and hyped. Alright, now we're at the Gematsu articles. Let's go through these. Fate Reawakened DLC Prometheus has been announced. I'm going to hit play here just so I can adjust myself in the chair. I'm starting to slope down, slide more in the chair. I added back support and still not really enough. Yep. Again, it's really annoying on April 1st. Just not a lot of stuff you can do. Although online, there's not a lot of stuff happening day to day anyways. I'm increasingly just getting bored and shopping too much. Let's see. Atelier Minima announces a fast-paced casual action game called Yokai Battling Game in Kawagoe for PC. Which I don't know if I know this studio. It doesn't feel like the studio that I recognize. Okay. So it's like an arcade baseball game, or one of the predecessors to pinball itself. I don't know how popular that kind of game would be. Is Fate Reawakened? It's 72% positive. At a certain level, that probably isn't high enough to really be on my wish list, but I'm not going to take it off now. But there is definitely an argument to start to cull or herd and remove games that are not really that relevant. You can see the 24-hour peak is only 42 players, although it is a single player game. I don't really recognize a Fate series of games other than the Fate series of visual novels, which are completely different. And then here's the Yokai Battling Game, which I question whether I'd really want to play it. It does say it supports English though. PlayStation Plus monthly game lineup for April has been announced. We talked about that, those 3 games. Let's see, Minos launches April 9th. It's a maze building strategic puzzle game. Is it like Dungeon Keeper? Maybe to some extent, but also it might be a little bit more turn-based than you would think. Yeah. At a certain level, it might also be a little bit more tower defensey than you'd want it to be. Now, in the story of the Minotaur, there absolutely was no point in at which the Minotaur himself was building or expanding the maze at all. It was the king that built the maze, and then also the king that seemingly either the king or the queen slept with a bull and created a half bull, half I guess the king would have to sleep with a cow, and bestiality implications certainly are there. And then they threw the Minotaur, this shame, upon the kingdom in the maze to hide him away. Which that's fairly commonplace in these kinds of stories, is that they start as dirty limericks, nasty rumors that one group of people is saying about another. And then he gets expanded into fan fictions and eventually becomes myths themselves. The odds of a human being able to successfully crossbreed with a cow, I think, are 0, really. I don't think the DNA would be anywhere close to that. Moving on, Ground Zero launches April 16th. It's a retro-inspired survival horror game being dated. I'm never really a fan of the mask that covers the face but doesn't cover the face, and generally masks that do cover the face are even worse. It tells me very little to say they're making a survival horror game. It definitely feels like this is that PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era of graphics. So I would assume this is heavily inspired by Resident Evil. Which just perhaps also highlights the extreme amount of delay one has if you are just copying what other people are doing. This feels like this easily would have been a game that started development when they announced the Resident Evil 2 remake. Yeah, and it's just now coming out after the Resident Evil 4 remake came out, and is obviously visually completely different. And I think these kinds of survival horror games are probably already saturated even at this point. Particularly ones that are going to play very close or look close to Resident Evil 1. Yeah, I don't think that there's just really a lot of desire for non-Resident Evil games that are kind of like Resident Evil games. Let's see, Mortal Shell 2 gameplay reveal trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. We don't need to watch every single trailer. Yeah. I think too the zombie aspect is too simplistic. If you're going to make a game like this, you almost have to set it in a completely different time frame and a completely different types of enemies. I certainly would be more interested if it was like in medieval times and you were fighting ghouls or instead zombies or witches or just plague rats or something like that. But yeah, it's just all too much copy and paste, it feels like. And you know, it could be good, certainly, but it's not bringing too much new to the table, or if it's bringing anything new to the table. This, I guess, is the first time I've seen Mortal Shell 2. Which, yeah, that concept of a game felt like it was trying to do something slightly different, but I didn't feel like people really responded too well to the first Mortal Shell game, possibly because it was just too difficult. Which that was certainly the trend a few years back, is to just make everything Demon Souls, Dark Souls like, and that it was really difficult. And even games that did do that weren't really getting the idea that, while some of those games might be described as difficult, they also often were particularly fair, and if you knew what you were doing, you could still get through them. We have a table flip simulator launching May 21st for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Which they've had in Japan arcade games where you simulate flipping the table, which is a fairly Japanese thing to do. But this doesn't actually feel like you're flipping a table at all. This feels like you're just throwing stuff and breaking things. Not really flipping the table at all. The arcade table flip simulators in Japan are much like the arcadey punching bags, which I'd highly recommend never actually punching any of those, because there's just a real danger you're going to hurt yourself on those machines. John Taffer from Bar Rescue always gets rid of the arcade punching bags because he got sued, or nearly got sued, because somebody was drunk and punched one of them and hurt themselves. Or somebody was drunk and took a swing towards the punching bag and hit another customer. Yeah, this feels like downright false advertising after watching that trailer. The one thing I did not see really was the table being flipped. Yeah, I don't think simulating a table flipping even works without kind of the physical arcade aspect. So yeah, I am very uninterested in that game. The high-speed third-person running game Haste is now available for modern consoles and Xbox One, priced at $19.99. Okay. You can see it's been on Steam for just one day, it seems, but it's got way too many reviews. So I feel like it came out of early access. Yeah. Something weird about the release date. Oh no, that was a year ago it came out, so that explains the positive reviews and the amount of reviews. It feels like this might be too high speed of a game for me, and that the visuals are just all blurry as you're running around. I could probably give it a try and play it, but yeah, it's going to be one of those games where it's very much about how it feels, and obviously the reviews are giving it positive reception there, but visually it's not going to look that great. Heroes of Might and Magic Olden Era launches in early access on April 30th. The strategic empire building, turn-based tactical battles, and in-depth RPG mechanics game. This is, I believe, a remake of one of the Heroes of Might and Magic games. Nope. It is claiming to be a new installment in the series, which is much more interesting. That being said, a new installment in the Heroes of Might and Magic series can't change too much, and so it's going to feel and look a lot like the last Heroes of Might and Magic game from potentially a couple decades ago. And I think that's what people want. I think the formula basically is baked in, and while it would be nice if things were faster, because that is going to be the problem with any Heroes of Might and Magic game, is that by modern standards you're going to spend hundreds of hours playing the game, unless they've figured a way of speeding it up. But you don't want things to really change too much. And at a certain level, I think a modern Might and Magic game probably will have considerably fewer maps, considerably fewer things, smaller maps, things to do. Probably a much larger emphasis on multiplayer, online multiplayer, possibly for the first time. What it is showing me here looks pretty good. There was a point here with these constellations, which I have no idea what that is. And there's some other stuff I definitely have seen that look like they might be somewhat new concepts. Of course, they could just be reimagining somewhat old concepts. But this is your combat. Is you're on the hex grid and you're competing against each other. And you're going to do a lot of that. It does create an interesting question, certainly, as far as I'd like to play that game. I don't think there's a big justification to playing the old games. As far as there'll just be too big of a time suck for it. But yeah. I probably would just do like a quick look on the old Might and Magic games, just to kind of show what they look like in interfaces and designs before playing the newest one. Then it still would be a huge time suck to play the newest one, but I'd like to do it. Yeah, I'm still, like all humans, running into problems where I don't have enough time and energy for all the games that are coming out. Moving on, content warning for modern consoles, Xbox One and Switch is now available. This is another, I think, friend slop style of game. Content warning is. Yeah. It is rated very positively, but it is online co-op only. So that's why it's not on my wish list. Let's see. Kantai Collection developer C2 Architect announces a strategy RPG called Kigao Kikaku for PC and mobile. Okay. Looks like it's a military type game. Cover-based shooting military type game. Sakura Wars 30th anniversary logo has been revealed. And of the Sakura Wars anime series, which I guess also had Sakura Warriors video games. I'm pretty sure Sakura Wars had an anime series of some sort, but maybe it was a video game series first. First entry in Sakura Wars series launched for the Saturn in 1996, and the last one to was Sakura Wars Reboot in 2019, as far as the mainline games. Let's see, bases loaded, based HoloLive Baseball, HoloBase has been announced for PC. That feels like a mouthful. This looks like a old-fashioned, pretty boring baseball game. This might very well be an example of an experiment on seeing just how much you can sell to Hall Live fans. That would be my perspective in question there. We talked about this before. Shift Up has acquired Shinji Mikami's led Studio Unbound. I doubt we'll get too much here. Notice how Gamatsu has a full transcript of what was in the announcement video, which is certainly going the extra mile. But yeah, apparently they're showing more pictures of this biblically accurate angel type creature, which makes me wonder if they're doing something kind of like Bayonetta, but probably nothing actually connected to Bayonetta. That would be the big shocker there, is if they had the creator of Bayonetta, or they had Platinum Games on board so they could use Bayonetta as a character. I don't think that's really what is likely to happen. And while I've described it as a biblically accurate angel, it could also just be a Rat King equivalent of crows. Just a whole bunch of crows merged together and twisted into each other. Let's jump back to the end here. Yeah. That could be anything, basically. Let's see. Crimson Desert sales have topped 4 million. Increasingly doing very well. It, I think, is already on track, if not guaranteed, to at least be discussed for Game of the Year at the end of the year, unless people just lose interest or they screw it up in some horrible way. Elder Scrolls Online reveals its 2026 content, starting with Season 0, Dawn and Dusk on April 2nd, plus a return to Skyrim in early 2027. Okay. So would that mean that Elder Scrolls Online for the first time will allow the players to go back to Skyrim? Or do they sometimes let you go to Skyrim and then they don't let you go to Skyrim? I imagine they would not take things away, so I would assume this is the first time that the landmass of Skyrim would be playable in Elder Scrolls Online. But yeah, I imagine there is a fandom around Elder Scrolls Online, but I don't think I am it by any means, and I don't think the fandom's that big. It really feels ridiculously impossible to have a online version of Elder Scrolls and also try and make single player expansions to the Elder Scrolls universe. Feels like they needed to either put all their eggs in one basket or the other, and I would assume they should have put it in the online. For me, had Elder Scrolls Online been the only Elder Scrolls game ever going to be made in the future, it would have made things a lot easier. You wouldn't have to talk about Elder Scrolls games, and you wouldn't have to have this anticipation for a game that very possibly will never actually come out in Elder Scrolls 6. Whatever it's actually called. It does perhaps also speak, as we're looking at this footage to the real lack of consistency as far as what an Elder Scrolls RPG is. Yeah, I don't really know if it is supposed to be a high action game with players fighting each other, or if it's supposed to be a slower action where you're the hero of the story, like Skyrim. Yeah, it definitely feels like if you had played Skyrim, then you played Elder Scrolls Online, you would perhaps find it too different from each other. In the last 30 days, Elder Scrolls Online has been mostly positive, as 768 players. It says there's 13,000 players online. Again, a smaller, more niche audience. But yeah, to me, seeing those numbers now, and seeing that this came out in 2014, I think you could have probably shut down the online after 10 years, or stopped putting content in it after 10 years, at least, and then had your teams develop content for the next Elder Scrolls game. But in the case of Elder Scrolls and Todd Howard, I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't if the problem isn't about content being made for the next Elder Scrolls game versus Todd Howard just not being decisive about what the game is going to be, what the story is going to be, and what game mechanics will be in the next Elder Scrolls game. Let's see, a ride-style action game called Fruitimo Juicy Night Ride has been announced for PC. That sounds like a weird name, to say the least. I think it's trying to be kid-friendly, but certainly if one wanted to pervert it, Juicy Night Ride is open for innuendo. Yeah, this definitely feels like one of those fruit juicer type games, or slice the fruit inspired games, which, yeah, the fruit theme never really made a lot of sense. So here's your April Fool's Day compilation from Gamatsu, Near Cosmetic Horror, Rebungered. We'll just scroll down these and without comment. Let's see if any of this is worth mentioning. A lot of these games I don't even know about, like Surfpunk, furry updates. I don't know why people think just saying the word furry or mentioning furries is particularly funny. It just feels like that is the new gay, or as far as just here's some subgroup that's some small niche and admittedly awkwardly weird group of people, but yeah, there's the idea of othering groups for comedy is another thing that certainly is just dead as far as comedy goes nowadays. Is you just can't other groups just because they're weird, or you think they're weird. Yeah. And this is probably a great example also where another example where a April Fool's Day joke like this doesn't really land in video games, because it feels like if this is something that you could actually do and add to the game, then why not actually add it to the game? And that's the only time April Fool's Day jokes actually make sense, is if you actually are adding content and people can keep that content and play it forever. Yep. Let's see. Sega saying they're making their logo 3% more blue. It is a stupid joke, but not particularly offensive. Like any kind of Rusty Lake update might be a real update. This is just yet another example of where people are wasting their time and energy, and now is not the time for game developers or publishers to be wasting their time and energy announcing fake games or adding fake content or even making a specific single image. If I owned a video game company, I definitely would ban any kind of April Fool's Day jokes that it is possible. Yeah, I would just ban April 1st jokes, and I would ban announcements on April 1st. Probably ban it a week. Wouldn't be a terrible time to give everybody a vacation and a week off. Just the week of April 1st, everybody takes off. We do nothing during that time. I just don't see how any of these jokes would ever really be that funny. Yeah. I did like the... Let's look at this trailer one for the Magical Matica. I did like the 8-bit Bayonetta game. I think that was an April Fool's Day joke because it was an actual game for free put out and was an intriguing concept of an experimental project. But that's pretty much the only example of somebody actually making a game and giving it away for free, or even making content and giving it away as part of a game. We can see they're not really showing you anything of interest in this, and that they just made a version of this character in a more silly chibi style, and maybe that is a skin you can actually get. But I'm not going to jump back into that game to actually get it. Yeah, I said I was going to check into Shadowverse and see how far the single player stuff has gone. I've clicked the button to add it back to my library, and I'll see if I can install it and launch it before it shuts down. Although I may not really be able to see too much either as far as what the final single player visual novel aspect would have been. I may be locked at the point where I last finished something. There really weren't even that many April Fool's Day jokes, which maybe that's a good thing. I think it probably is, that there are fewer and fewer companies wanting to do that, although it may just be that there are fewer and fewer video game companies in business. Let's see, Zero Parades for Dead Spies launches May 21st for PC and then later in 2026 for the PS5. It is a intriguing title, to say the least. This one didn't really catch my attention originally, but I'll put it on the fall list now. Yeah. And then the Zero Parades for Dead Spies might be something that intrigues me, might not. Might be that it's too CRPG for me. Cosmic Galaxy Wars is now available. Let's see what it looks like on Steam. Yeah, it doesn't really look like anything of interest. A co-op bullet heaven roguelite called The Spell Brigade launches April 29th for PS5 and PC. Which I feel like I've heard that name before. It is on my follow list. Doesn't have a checkbox. Though frankly at this point if something's on the follow list and it doesn't have a checkbox, it probably just means that the game came out a long time ago. This one is still in early access. So I guess that's what's happening, is it's coming out of early access. Let's see, Darksiders War Mastered Edition is coming to the PS5 and the Xbox Series on May 19th. I am shocked that that didn't come out years ago. Previously it was on the PS4, Xbox One, Wii U, Switch, and PC. So THQ Nordic seemingly not having enough money to even release it on new consoles, or I mean, it definitely doesn't feel like it would be hard to release it on new consoles. Perhaps, though, it's more of a case that the reason why 10 years later they're releasing it on new consoles is because they are close to announcing the fourth and I would assume final Darksiders game as far as numbered titles go, to wrap up this series of games that has been going on off and on for well over 10 years. Yeah, this is definitely the Darksiders game that I think is the best of the three I've played, 1, 2, and 3, and I really wish they had just stuck with this gameplay style throughout the entire series, although that probably wouldn't have helped them that much because the big problem is really just that Vigil Games, which I think might be out of business now, didn't have the funding and was too ambitious in their design. Darksiders 1 feels like the true human game that actually got to succeed and actually got to see sequels, where Two Humans concept is a story and concept I would like to see somebody else take on, but can't really ever happen due to legal reasons. Let's see, Pal World, more than just Pal's special video, characters detailed. Is this romance options? Well, this was a game introduced on as an April Fool's joke in 2024, and they seem to be implying that it's still being developed on. Looks like it would be just a romance visual novel. The question is, should you really believe Pocket Pair that they're being honest? And I don't fully feel like they are being honest. Or, you know, they might put something out that's extremely short after years of April Fool's Day jokes. Yep, it's tagged with horror, dating sim, sexual content, psychological horror, hentai, everything. But it's not even out yet, and it's tagged with all those tags, which further makes me believe it's not actually ever coming out, and that they just spent $100 to make a fake game on Steam. At a certain point, Steam probably should crack down on games that are announced that don't have at least demos out within a certain amount of time. It seems kind of ridiculous. Sprint City is now available in early access, the shared world competitive 2D platformer from Speedrunners creators. R-Type Tactics 1 and 2 Cosmos launches June 18th in the West. This is obviously a side-scrolling shooter game. Looks somewhat modern. A storybook-based adventure game, The Day I Became a Bird, launches April 16th for the PS5, Switch, and PC. Okay. It definitely feels like today is going to be a longer day. Yeah, there might be something here. Let's see, Vulture's Scavengers of Death launches April 28th. It's a retro-styled survival horror game. Alright. Yeah, again, a little too low polygon-y. Alright, well, I'm going to mute myself and run to a quick bathroom break, and I'll be back in a few minutes while this plays. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah, the video basically stopped as I was walking out of the room. That is the problem with trailers, is, well, that was only 30 seconds. The reality is I would have needed probably 3 to 4 minutes long trailers, and they don't make them that long. Moving on. Union Syndrome Rhythm Psychosis launches April 24th. Okay, I assume this is a rhythm game. Here's the vultures. Mario Kart World version 1.6.0 update is now available. Yep. Let's see. Chic Hondo Blue Pietra details its major characters. Looks like it's a side-scrolling shooter of some sort. It looks pretty weird as far as the character designs, or at least that first character design. It does seem like it does have kind of a strange bend to it. I suppose it is worth wondering that if you could rotate a monitor to be vertical, so a side-scrolling shooter became a shoot 'em up, you still would run into problems with the heads-up displays not rotating unless you could do that in software. That's where you really would need to have the software collaborate with the monitor potentially spinning. And then Eidos Montreal has laid off 124 staff. The head of the studio, David and Fossey, also has departed. Okay. And then that brings us to gaming on Linux. Man, it seems like, yeah, it's already been a very long stream today, and I don't think anywhere as much to do with it being April 1st as it has to do with it being Wednesday and in April in general, just not one of the slow months like January. So, gaming on Linux articles. The OptiScaler tool gets a huge new release with more upscaling and frame generation goodies if you want to play around with that. Sprint City from the creators of Speedrunners is on Steam. Alright. The Long Dark Story reaches the finale with episode 5 out now and a big discount. Long Dark, I did not realize was an episodic game, and it's already on my wish list, which I guess I'll just leave it there. Let's see. Apparently it was review bombed, they're saying, or positivity bombed. I don't recall why that would have been the case. Boxroom is a clever casual room builder that gives your Steam games a shelf. Yeah. Again, I just don't feel like the implementation on how you would highlight your Steam games makes a lot of sense to treat them like DVDs or VHS cases. That's the real question, is even for most collectors who are going to have smaller collectors, it makes a lot more sense to turn your DVDs 90 degrees so you can see the front faces of them than it does to make sense to have them on their spines. Let's see. Gotta check my smart house here for a second. Something false triggered. Yeah. I hate to do this, but I need to go make sure I turned off a sink or something in the bathroom. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I'm assuming either it was a complete false sensor or like a bug flew right in front of the sensor and somehow triggered it. But yeah, I was just want to make sure that I didn't leave a toilet or sink running. Don't need to run a water bill up, or worse, have water damage. Anyways, yeah, we were talking about box room. Yeah, I just don't feel like bookshelves nowadays are usually even full of books, so they easily could be, for a lot of cases, half as deep and become just collectible shelves and very sparsely decorated. And most bookshelves are built so cheaply anyways, there's a decent chance that you're not gonna be able to just load them up with books anyways without them bowing under the weight. So the next Gaming on Linux article is, if you love horror boomer shooters, keep blighting in your radar. There's a noticeable lack of a user interface in this game, which perhaps that makes more sense in horror games. There is definitely a feel for a game like this that is very possibly is a game being built in a very modern engine with effectively fake old school graphics and graphics filters being applied to what would be more generic 3D assets or modern looking 3D assets. I'm not particularly a huge boomer shooter fan, so it doesn't grab my attention too much. And I would say it definitely is pretty obvious that it looks different in movement than it does in the screenshots, which is probably true for a lot of games. Raspberry Pi prices have risen once again, along with a new 3 gigabit Raspberry Pi 4 being announced. Yeah, effectively the Raspberry Pi at this point, I think, is dead as a concept. Again, the Bonacera, the RetroPie builds for the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus really were the last ones to really matter. I don't think RetroPie has updated itself in potentially years. The newest Raspberry Pis are not powerful enough to emulate any newer systems, so you really can't play any new games. And anything that otherwise that you could do with a Raspberry Pi can just be done with cheaper hardware, even before this price increase. At one point, this was the cheapest solution. Now it is pretty stupid to go with a Raspberry Pi, particularly because you're going to have your own ARM chip instead of an x86 chip. You're going to have a custom GPU, which is going to be harder to work with. And yeah, you just don't need a single board computer in most cases that have USB plugs and Ethernet cords, or even other attachment points for a Pi hat or for a camera or for a screen. Yeah, Raspberry Pi is, I'm pretty sure, still somewhat independent, but yeah, they definitely are not trying to bring the price down. And even if they were trying to bring the price down, they really can't bring the price down because they're still having to buy RAM from other people. They're not making their own RAM. which that's perhaps one of the ways the Raspberry Pi could be useful, is instead of just giving smaller amounts of RAM to as a model, give us the same amount of RAM, which really you probably only need 2 gigs, but slower. Nobody wants slower, but if you can get slower and cheaper, if you could make your own RAM and it was cheaper, that would be a much better scenario. But I don't think they're a big enough company to really do that. The other thought, certainly in the past, has been just come out with a new Raspberry Pi 6 that was just way more powerful. But yeah, a lot has changed in the years since Raspberry Pi was a big thing to talk about. But with a Steam Deck, with a Steam machine now, with the potential of just having a Linux version on your computer instead of Windows, it's just going to be easier and easier to run emulators on those kinds of devices for more money, certainly, but you can also do a lot more with those devices. As a desktop replacement, the Raspberry Pi never worked. It was never powerful enough. As a thing you would use to control projects, it would heavily depend on the project you were doing. In many cases, you didn't need the power of a Pi, and you'd use a Arduino or an ESP32. And yeah, nowadays it more than likely would be smarter to use some form of the ESP32 for any kind of project. And if you needed more processing power, you would just buy more ESP32s over the Raspberry Pi. Which that is also another thing. If you compare the size of an ESP32 shell chip, for instance, they're just way, way smaller than this form factor. Sure, they don't have the same connection points, but most people don't know. The hat pins in particular was probably a huge mistake there. Just not something that they needed to have on every single board. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. It is a shame, but there has not been an interesting new Raspberry Pi project in years, and makers have pretty much stopped talking about it. Moving on, the French consumer group UFCQ Choicer has sued Ubisoft over the Crew shutdown. So they're trying to preserve the game in some form by suing. It'll be interesting to see how far that goes. Money is life and everything in Super Debt, an unrelenting horror-themed bullet hell roguelike. Let's see what this looks like. Well, this feels like you're controlling too much and too much is going on the screen with limited space to run around. It kind of feels Binding of Isaac-esque in its gameplay elements, but then it with a whole bunch of economics, capitalism added, which, I mean, if Binding of Isaac is the horrors of a crazy religious abusive mother being told, then the horrors of a crazy abusive capitalist society is a decent variation on that type of story that you can tell. See, seems they are charging you 25 cents per bullet. So yeah, there might be a game there, but it would have to play really well and be very polished like Binding of Isaac. Otherwise, it's a kind of interesting concept that probably isn't worth playing if it plays poorly. If it plays poorly. Let's see. Moving on, as expected, Slay the Spire 2 leads the way for the most played Steam Deck game for March 2026. I don't know how they know that it is up the most played, but okay. I'll leave it at that. You can see it's very positive. I think it's still in early access. Here we have a game called Shadows Show. Which doesn't look like anything. Did we just transition into new games that came out on Steam? No, because this is from 2024. This is, I guess, games that were in the top games being played on Steam Deck. So we'll just close all these tabs fairly quickly. Let's see. Lake Hopper looks like a wonderful casual seaplane flight simulator. Yeah. Flight simulators have always been a thought, but I don't think I was ever going to really ever play them. And here you have a game from 2024 that's still labeled as early access, which at some point you probably should just give up on it if it is a early access game. I think because it's a farming sim, because it's been in early access for a couple years, you gotta take that off the follow list. Eugenics being played a lot on Steam Deck. Slay the Spire 1 being played a lot on Steam Deck. And here's Lake Hopper. Yeah. Deep Rock Galactic Survivor being played on Steam Deck. Baldur's Gate 3 being played on Steam Deck. Heretic 2 has a new reversed engineered source port. Let's see if we can look at this trailer for Heretic 2. I remember a game called Heretic. I don't think I ever played it. This looks like this is an announcement trailer of the game when it first came out, and yeah, boy does that footage look awful. Just looks like it probably was pulled off some kind of cassette tape or something. Yeah. Heretic feels like it's a Quake style shooter game, but doesn't really look too much like that. I question the relevancy of old games like this, but it's nice that people are making source ports for old games. Helldivers 2 is mixed in the last 30 days, so people not as hot on it as they once were. Mega Monk still being played a lot in the Steam Deck. Fans of Portal and first-person puzzlers will definitely want to check out He Who Watches. Okay, let's watch this trailer. I'm a fan of first-person puzzlers and Portal. So you shoot these eye crates and something happens. And then you can rotate your vision, and it seems like it rotates the world. It was interesting to have this magical bow with chain. There's always a danger of rotating yourself around the world so much that you get motion sick. There's always also a danger of puzzle games becoming a little too repetitive. Hundreds of puzzles. Seems like a lot. But I think I'd be up for a game like that. Galacho is still being played a lot on Steam Deck. This one's Rhythm Psychosis. I could put that on the follow list. Resident Evil Requiem still being played on the Steam Deck. Very positive. I'd be shocked if the reviews start going negative at this point. But DLC might happen. A Diablo 2 inspired auto battle dungeon crawler, Skull Horde, launches April 10th. Okay. That's an interesting idea, but I would say the visuals being shown here do not feel like Diablo 2 at all. And I think the visuals on Diablo 2 are what make Diablo 2 Diablo 2. I don't think auto-generated dungeons and portals and the fantasy worlds are unique enough to Diablo 2 to say those are the defining factors. Although very possibly Diablo introduced a lot of those concepts to the mainstream audiences. So I don't know how it's auto battling though. Like, what input are you really adding, if anything, or are you just watching it play? That's the question I would definitely have. So yeah, they hurt themselves by comparing it to Diablo 2, because this might have been a game I was more interested in if they had just said it was a dungeon crawler. Hades 2 is still in early access. No, it's not in early access anymore. When did it come out of early access? I don't know, but apparently it came out in September 2025 out of early access. I thought it still was in early access, but whatever. Move on. Skull Horde in screenshots. Less impressive than in video, which is often the case. Potatoes and other games still being played on the Steam Deck quite a bit. Here we have He Who Watches, which I could see myself just ignoring this game completely. Again, just by evaluating only by the screenshots, getting a different opinion or the wrong opinion on something. A virtual hangout game, Rec Room, is shutting down in June. Rec Room was a free-to-play social hangout space available both for VR and standard gaming. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the age restriction or age collection laws are going to start to push more game developers to not want to maintain virtual hangout social sites like this. I also wouldn't be surprised if it's just that the game itself is hit an end. The Flashpoint update for Arc Raiders has lots of good stuff, according to Gaming on Linux. I will leave it at that. I'm not that interested in Arc Raiders, and I need to hurry here. That brings us to GameDeveloper.com. The French consumer group sues Ubisoft over the shutdown of The Crew. Yes, Super Debt. I'll put that on the follow list. Second unload. Be on the follow list. Crafton, FlyQuest, and Arboretum invest $3.5 million in psychedelic games MOBA Golden Tides. Seems like it's interesting. 3 companies are investing so much money. More time innovating, less time writing code. Arc Raiders publisher Nexion believes AI will liberate its workforce. I think that is pretty ridiculous. Particularly since there isn't this long history of innovation happening in the game industry in general. And if I looked at the Arc Raiders publisher Nexon, I'd imagine innovation is particularly low for any company that's going to embrace AI that quickly. Shift Up has acquired the Resident Evil creators studio, Shinji Mikami's new studio. Yep. Notice how they phrase this just terribly. It should be Shift Up has acquired Unbound studio, or Studio Unbound, which ironically I guess is now bound by Shift Up, for better or worse. An Emmy-winning animation studio just bought the rights to the multiple Roblox titles. Multiple feature-length movies and television shows are already in development. Interesting. And assume these are going to be terrible, low-effort Roblox TV shows, movies. Yeah. I doubt any of it's going to be good. But weirdly, on some of those streaming services, there are channels where it is just people playing Roblox. It is just people playing Minecraft, and even less commonly. So there may very well be a generation of kids that are cool with watching Roblox style animations and calling them movies and TV shows. Let's see, the Moss developer Polyarc is laying off staff. The VR studio is cutting an unspecified number of jobs. Always wanted to play this game, Moss. Unfortunately, it being VR only, that was not a possibility. It's actually a little surprising that they have stayed around this long, considering how they were fairly tied to the PlayStation VR, which never was a major success. Embracer Group has laid off 124 employees at Eidos Montreal. It is helpful for GameDeveloper.com to point out that Embracer Group actually owned Eidos Montreal, because I had kind of forgotten about that. So that changes the picture quite a bit. So then we have a new release of Darksiders 1 and layoffs that doesn't paint a positive picture that we are going to see anything good or great from Embracer Group. Yeah, they really screwed the pooch there, just trying to acquire a whole bunch of companies. And in the end, them doing business badly is still going to have Embracer Group having the rights to a bunch of games, just not having any talent to actually make those games. And so then they're either going to have to license things out or go bankrupt, and people are going to have to acquire the rights to those games through a bankruptcy. Alright, that brings us to all the new games on Steam, so let's go through this as quickly as possible. Same old rules apply. If I swipe down like this, I'm closing the tab because I'm uninterested. If I want to go through the steps of potentially making a YouTube short in the future, I will swipe it this way. And if I am really interested in the game, I will put it on the follow list, then swipe this way. the vast majority of games that come out on Steam are not worth commenting on, unfortunately. And so, I will not be wasting my breath on a lot of things. Things that are already on the follow list and already have a check mark will get closed because I've already handled those games. Tiny might be something here. Yep. Might be something. Yeah. Don't think I'm interested in that. Or that, or that. I'm mostly interested in just calling it a day. Something like this looks nice, but it could very well be just a walking simulator. Once I put something on the follow list, I probably should explain this every stream, come to think of it. The idea is, once it's on the follow list, is to wait until it is out of early access, it is a final product, and then it has at least 30 user reviews, so it has some level of relevancy. I don't think this is anything. What is this, a visual novel? Apparently so. So yeah, I'm looking for a mostly positive average number of reviews with over 30 user reviews in a reasonable amount of time. Obviously something that's been out for 10 years. Increasingly I'm trying to avoid things that use AI art, and I'm going to work on that aspect more, as far as just closing all tabs potentially that have AI art in them, which will save me a whole bunch of time. Of course, I have to actually schedule out and spend some time programming on my computer, which I definitely have not been in programming mode in my brain for a few months now. Ever since I had eyesight problems and had to get glasses. That killed a lot of my motivation. Plus also I'm just still dealing with a ton of stuff that I need to do to clean and declutter my house, which is taking up way too much of my time, and it's going to just constantly take up way too much of my time. And frankly, it's taking up way too much of my money too. It's a lot of troll games like the chicken that never skipped leg day. April 1st might be a day where we see a lot more troll April Fool's Day joke games, but I would say that's not as likely because I think Steam is just so flippant and weird about when it allows your release day to be a release day that if you were going to just rush and try and release on April 1st, you'd probably have to have a game submitted and evaluated months in advance. Yeah, this looks like a different name for Carcassonne, I think is the name of it. That being said, if it plays the same and or plays better than your official version of this game, that might be a better offering. Yeah. not seeing a lot of things here, not having a lot to talk about. There's a real question to be asked, certainly, as far as what's the point of more and more games being allowed on the Steam marketplace when the quality of the games are just still incredibly bad. I almost want to say yes to this, but I feel like this is just AI art generated too. And the one before that was an adult game that probably should be in the adult section from the tags applied to it. Yeah, I think we can just close curse words without even me looking at it off screen. Yeah. For the adult games that are not in the adult section, they tend to be the most low effort garbage adult games. Anyways, you get just a ton of RPG Maker anime characters with big boobs type games. It's never even like unique art. It's clearly the same stuff that is being pre-bought and just reused as far as character designs go. We have more of a Korean character design story. Visual novel? Yep. I'll give that a chance just to see what the reception is like for that. So support English, it says it does. But nah. Looks like a Vampire Survivors game with an anime girl. Which unfortunately, yeah, it still is fairly common that you'll just have games with anime girls in it, and that's the only real twist on the concept. I'll give that one a chance though. An English chef. Yeah. This is the second, like, extremely difficult pinball game I've seen in the past couple of months. Which there really is not enough room for multiple of this. And this clearly is AI images, AI art. It's fairly obvious that if something is going to have AI art in it, it should have to go through a different process. I don't know why Binding of Isaac Rebirth is here. It came out 12 years ago. And I don't think that there's a new update for it at the moment. Fallout 4. These must still be games that were played most on the Steam Deck. Yeah, that has to be what's going on. Yeah, there isn't really a large amount of new tabletop type games that get made. It is kind of crazy that as soon as a tabletop game gets made that there isn't a digital version on day one for all of them. But yeah, even if there was a digital version of those day one games, that probably wouldn't be to the best benefit of the tabletop game sellers who want to potentially own more of the profits and sell physical versions, not digital versions. there is potentially an argument to be made that people who are making real-world tabletop games first are just old-fashioned and backwards in their thinking, and they should be making digital versions of their games first. And then if there's enough success in the digital version, maybe then making the physical version. But yeah, doesn't really work that way. Looks like there might be something here. I'm just hoping to be done fairly quickly. Yep, follows cleanup good. Customizable difficulty settings in Star Trek Voyager across the unknown. Let me just scroll down this fairly quickly, but some of these might be April Fool's Day announcements too. Yep. I still am very much in a weird situation where I'm going too long and I'm too exhausted at the end of 3 hours and 30 minutes of streaming, and I don't know how to really correct that. But I'll try to think of something. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.